Hello there. I've been hearing this phrase a lot. You know how sometimes you hear something and then it just pops up over and over again? Well, I've been hearing it a lot over the last few days, and it's mostly happened since Liz Gunn had her horrible, tragic, brutal arrest that left her bruised and battered and unable to go on with life, because when this happened, and she put out a statement afterwards, she used the phrase, "This is not the New Zealand I grew up with." I wanted to look into that though, because I think she's looking at things through rose-tinted glasses. See, I grew up in the 80s and 90s in small town New Zealand, where if you weren't white and straight, you were nothing. And in the 90s, the government actively punished people for being on the benefit. Remember the mother of all budgets? The 80s weren't much better. There was an actual terrorist attack that happened in our harbour, but that wasn't the only one. There was also the trades hall bombing that happened in the early 80s, which saw somebody lost their life after a bomb was left in a suitcase. But here's the kicker about the 80s. After those sort of austerity measures and Rogernomics shut down and restructured a whole bunch of things like the Ministry of Works, which hired proportionately higher numbers of Māori and Pacific Islanders, the rate of unemployment for those particular groups skyrocketed. And this massive peak of the graph here is actually 1990. It was bad if you were a person of colour living in this country at the time because of what had happened. There was also a government-mandated wage and price freeze to fight inflation. Remember inflation? That thing that people worry about now was also really bad back then. In the 70s, we had nuclear testing in the Pacific Islands. We had Māori who had to be honorary white people to go on tour to South Africa. We had massive inflation, and we had huge fuel shortages around the country as well. Oh yeah, some of the cops were corrupt and got innocent people put in prison. And of course, the incredibly racist dawn raids happened between 74 and 76. And if we look at the 60s, there was the great wool crash of the 60s, which saw the price of wool, our biggest export earner, drop by 30%. And that industry had to lose a whole bunch of workers who tended to be Māori. The 60s also saw us not being able to send Māori over to play in South Africa for rugby because of actual apartheid, not the bullshit apartheid that anti-vaxxers think they have to deal with. Before the 60s, there was actual segregation going on that nobody ever really talks about. In Pukekohe, you couldn't rent in certain places if you were Māori, and white people had to stay out of them. In some places, Māori were not to be served in bars, and in Hamilton, in one place, they weren't even allowed to try on pants while they were out shopping. So it seems the New Zealand that they grew up in was really kind of racist. No wonder they want to go back to then. It makes them feel like they were special and in charge.